Good morrow, good gentles, and welcome to What's Pagans Watching. And today we're talking about Ren Faire, the new HBO three-part documentary. And for some of you who didn't know, I actually used to be an entertainment director and theatrical director and manager of multiple Renaissance fairs, including the one that became the one that inspired King George himself. So let's talk about Ren Fair because I know a lot of people in the Ren Fair circle have been making videos or you've been seeing things from the actor's point of view and talking about how none of this is like fair at all. Well, I have a different opinion, and maybe it's because I am an entertainment director myself and I have worked for a gigantic fair. Uh, but I hope you're ready because we're about to have our own Boston Tea Party called the Ren Fair Tea Party right now as we talk about the new documentary on What's Pagan Watching. I'll see you right after the break. Hi, everyone, and welcome back from our intro. As you can tell, this is going to be episode one. Um, Renaissance Fair has so much for me to talk about, and I just got going and I just couldn't narrow it down to this small amount. So we're going to continue our escapade with other episodes. But today we're going to talk about the show Ren Faire on HBO Max. It's a three-part documentary, and I watched every single part of it. A lot of people said, "Oh, they couldn't get past the first part of the first 5 minutes or whatever," and a lot of people didn't like it. Now, did I love it? No, I won't say that I love it. However, I will say I feel like it was marketed wrong. I do feel like all the marketing made it almost feel like this immersive, interactive event where you're going to be seeing the actors and what they go through and how it goes through, and then the power play and all that stuff. And realistically, that's not what this documentary is. By far, this is not what this documentary is. What it is something that I would have totally guessed it would be. As someone who worked there as an entertainment director, as someone who knows a lot of the people who went to Agora or grew up under the Patterson fairs, and we're going to talk about that in a second, I was not surprised at all at what it was. It was a monumentous documentary about a man named George who did what everyone in the fair industry wanted to do, which was basically get a permanent site, have his own town, and be able to live fair year round. I mean, that's pretty much every fair person's dream. Now, he's very old and he's planning to die. And so the premise is he's going to turn over his chocolate factory. I'm going to use that reference because they use it a lot. And you have a lot of key players and you have people willing to buy the business. And let me tell you, people, when you think Renaissance fairs, you don't think ooga ooga money. But I'm talking 60, 70, 80 million dollars a year per fair. It is a huge industry. Some fairs rake in over $100 million a year, Renaissance Fair is not what it started out as. And I will agree, a lot of that comes from George and his crazy idea of expansion and bringing his almost business acumen or capitalism to a fundamentally hippie, anti-capitalist community. There is one issue that I did have right off the bat with the film, and that is just the fact that they, in the first 5 minutes, put across that George is the creator of Renaissance fairs. And I don't think that's fair to Phyllis Patterson and the Patterson family, who came up with the fair and Agora. And a lot of people don't realize that the Renaissance Fair was actually created as an educational experience. And as it grew, it became something completely different. And that's when the pleasure fair came around. And actually, George does reference that he worked a fair in San Francisco. The fair he would have been talking about was Black Point. Now, Black Point was the northern counterpart to the Southern Agora, Southern Fair. And it was the Northern California's Renaissance Pleasure Fair. It was what we had in I grew up in Northern California as a Renaissance Fair. Now, as I stated earlier, I have an interesting connection to Renaissance Fair. Renaissance Fair has always been a part of my life. As a child, my parents would take me to the Renaissance Fair all the time. And gosh, the magic, the sounds, the smell of a turkey leg, the costumes. As a little gay child, it was like my dream. It was amazing. And as I grew older, I ended up working at a Renaissance Fair. I met my husband at the Renaissance Fair, and I became a theatrical director of the very same fair that George was inspired by. And I'll talk about the history of the Northern California Renaissance Fair in another video. But the transformation from Black Point into the Hollister Casa de Fruta Fair is all a part of the same lineage of the fair that George was inspired by. I actually had the opportunity to be the theatrical director there. Now, a lot of actors and people are talking about how what they have perceived as fair and what they saw in this documentary do not align. And that Renaissance Fair is not like this mini version of Game of Thrones meets Succession. But I think it's because most actors don't have the experience of management, and they don't know what goes on behind the scenes. The scheming, the backstabbing, the intense rivalries, and in most California fair, the complete insecurity of leaders trying to make up for the fact that they've never done anything other than the fair. This is all a part of Renaissance Fair. George is not an amalgam. He is almost every single man of that generation that I've met who worked Renaissance Fair the entire time I've worked there. I mean, a lot of people have talked about how they've been appalled by his sexism and his, utter grotesque way of thinking and his habits. However, that's exactly what happens at fair. Fair is not, it's not this clean, cleansy place. And as many people come to find when they work at it, it really isn't a fantasy world. It is a job. It is an experience. And it's a job that, for the most part, especially in California fairs, works off of modern slave labor. It is a corporation basically working off of volunteer performers or low-paid performers. That's just what the truth of fair is. Now, George egotism and wanting to keep the fair and be King George, he built something. He built something that most people couldn't do. And I think that a lot of people in the fair community right now are bashing it because that's what they wanted to do. Like, that's just what they want in their life. Now, as a film, it's nothing special. It really isn't anything special. In fact, I really wish they would have spent some time with the actors and going through what the amazingness of fair could be as a performer, because there's also a lot of grit and a lot of drama and a lot of darkness that happens at fair. Like, I was really expecting them to get into that a little bit more. So I was disappointed that the entire film just focused on George and his efforts to kind of sell the fair and find a young wife. However, one of the things that struck me the most was the entertainment director of their fair, who became the general manager, and then again became the entertainment manager, and all the general managers and all the managers, and how George treats them. And a lot of people talk about how, oh, that's so disgusting, and that's not how fair is, and that's not how people are treated at fair. And that's just not the truth. In my experience with both small fairs and big fairs, they're ran by people who work in a microcosm, and they are the Ben Affleck, they're the Angelina Jolie, they're the king, the queens of these realms. And that comes with intense egotism and intense bias. In California, we have a history of fairs that are ran by women, which is a great thing. However, most of the majority of the major fairs have a lot of women who are running them, who are also very scared that, I guess, they had to find their place or fight for their place. So there's always a lot of conniving and backstabbing. And so all of that is very true to the essence of fair. And just like in the film, there are different congregations, there's different guilds, there's different cliques, there's different groups, there's different people in fair who connect. And that is the utter truth of it. I have worked for a general manager and an entertainment director when I was a theatrical director, and a fair owner when I was the entertainment director for small fairs. And all of them have had this issue. None of them have not been like George. They are all succumbed into their own ego. And that is what ends up having a lot of resentment. And for the entertainment director in the film, who ends up getting fired from being general manager, I mean, the truth of it is that he wasn't prepared. He spent his life at one fair, and he grew at one fair. That's all he knew. He doesn't know how to run a business. And fair, in the 50 years and more, almost 60 years, that it has graced the world, it's changed. It has went from that nonprofit hippie style of fair to major corporation theme park life, to multi-million-dollar industry. That is what Renaissance Faire is now. And at least the big fairs. there is still a lot of small fairs who have the heart of that original Phyllis Patterson, historic and teaching and fun, and that those fairs have their place. And there's amazing fairs like that. And I'll talk about those fairs in other videos. But the truth of it is the big fairs, all of them are like this. Do not get delusion to the fact that they're not ran by egomaniacs. They are. They are ran by people who treat their performers horribly. And that will segue into what will happen in part 2. I'm going to talk about the dark side of fair. Now, I told you that I love fair and that I met my husband at fair, and I had so many happy moments at fair. But there are also extreme nasty moments like, SA and backstabbing and racism and pay inequality and slave labor. All these things, and indentured servitudes, eco-terrorism on land. Like, there's so much that is dark about what the fair world has, including drugs and human trafficking and death. And this has always been a part of fair. It's just something that we never really talked about. And so that's why I'm excited to start this next series, branching off from What's Pagan Watching from Fair Documentary, which will be Fair Exposed. So make sure you follow, like, and subscribe to hear some of the crazy stories at Fair and hear some of the great things at Fair and the history of Fair and where Fair came from an ex-Fair himself. To everyone, well met. And until next time, just remember, you don't have to go home, but you can stay here. Like, follow, and subscribe.